In the heart of a winter so cold it could break stone, a small mountain town gathered to bury a hero. The snow fell heavy, the wind whispered like an old warning, and a loyal German shepherd sat trembling beside a flag-covered coffin. No one knew why the dog would not look away. No one understood the fear in his eyes. But when the ground opened to claim the dead, the dog suddenly erupted in a desperate bark that shattered the silence and changed everything. What he revealed beneath that coffin would uncover a truth deeper than any grave. Before we begin this journey of courage, loyalty, and the secrets buried under snow, tell me where you are watching from, and let me know how far this story travels. Ash Ridge disappeared into the storm hours before the funeral began. Snow drove slantwise out of a low iron sky, blurring the pine ridges and swallowing the narrow streets until the little mountain town was just a smear of light in a world of white. At the edge of town, the cemetery lay in a shallow bowl, headstones hunched under drifts, wreaths buried to their ribbons. In the middle of that field, a single oak coffin waited on metal braces above a raw, dark rectangle of earth, a folded flag, its only color. Deputy Cole Whitaker stood beside it, boots sunk in powder, shoulders salted with fresh snow. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered from years of patrol and mountain calls, the kind of man people looked to without thinking when something went wrong. His dark hair was clipped short under his hat, his jaw shadowed from too many sleepless nights. Usually his gray-blue eyes carried a dry, steady humor that took the edge off bad scenes. Once, Evan had joked that Cole could talk a charging bull into filling out a statement. Today that humor was gone. Grief had hollowed his face in 3 days, drawing new lines at the corners of his mouth. The coffin at his side was supposed to hold his best friend. Evan Hart had been 29, with sandy blonde hair that never quite stayed within regulations, and green eyes that always seemed to be laughing, even when his mouth wasn't. He was lean, quick, a runner who bounced on his heels when he was restless. A rough childhood and a tour in the Marines had left him wary of fireworks and crowds. But instead of making him mean, they had carved out room for a gentler core. He listened more than he spoke, made bad coffee on night shift, and worse jokes at crime scenes just to see someone's shoulders unclench. 3 nights ago, a patrol SUV on Ridge 27 had turned into a fireball. No one had been allowed near the wreck until it was cold. The report said there was one body. They said it was Evan. They said that was all there was to say. Cole had tried to believe them. He was not good at believing things he couldn't see. At his left side sat K9 Ranger, pressed so close his flank warmed Cole's leg through the uniform pants. Ranger was a sable German shepherd, 5 years old, big for his breed with a deep chest and long legs built for the steep slopes around Ash Ridge. His winter coat was thick, black along his back and ears, warm brown along his sides, dusted now with white where snow had settled and refused to melt. Amber eyes watched everything, intelligent and over-attentive, the way of a dog who had spent his whole life reading humans and never quite trusting that they knew what they were doing. A pale scar along his right flank marked an old barbed wire chase gone bad. Another, shorter mark hid under his collar from a training mishap. On duty, Ranger was focused and precise, moving through commands with machine-like efficiency. Off duty, he dropped slobbery tennis balls in the laps of anyone who looked sad and leaned his whole weight against the legs of tired officers in the break room. He had started as Evan's partner and then, by slow degrees, had become Cole's shadow too. Today he sat as ordered, body still, ears tipped slightly back, gaze locked on the coffin. From the moment the honor guard carried it out of the hearse, Ranger had not looked away. He had not barked or whined, only shivered now and then in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Cole felt those tremors through the leash wrapped around his gloved hand. On the far side of the coffin stood Grace Ellison with a bouquet of red roses clutched too tightly in her fingers. Grace, early 30s, worked nights at the Little Ash Ridge Hospital. She was average in height, slim but solid from years of lifting patients and running toward alarms instead of away. Auburn hair was braided and tucked into a wool cap, a few strands freezing at her temples. Freckles scattered faintly across skin, made paler by the cold and by exhaustion. Grace had the practiced calm of someone who had called families at 3 a.m. with the worst news and still turned up for her next shift. Beneath that calm, there was a softness she guarded fiercely, a refusal to let all that loss turn her bitter. With Evan, she had been in the awkward, fragile stage where shared coffee in the parking lot meant more than either of them would say out loud. Now she stared at the coffin with a composed face and eyes that glistened every time she blinked. Behind them, a loose semicircle of officers and townsfolk stood in the snow, black coats and uniforms speckled white, breath ghosting in the air. The priest's voice floated over the wind, saying familiar words about dust and rest. Near the gate, a bugler played taps, the notes bright and thin in the cold. Cole's throat tightened. In his grip, the leash twitched. Ranger's breathing had gone a fraction faster. The cemetery workers moved forward when the last note fell. Boots crunched, gloved hands took hold of the lowering straps. The coffin creaked as they readied it, flag fluttering once in a gust. The priest lifted his book, drawing breath to begin the final words. The world narrowed for Cole to the box, and the dark mouth of earth below it. Ranger moved. The change was small enough that anyone else might have missed it. Cole felt it like a jolt. The dog's ears pricked sharply forward, chest expanding on a deliberate deep breath. Nostrils flared, sorting scent from the thick mix of cold air and perfume and polish and chemical preservative that clung to the coffin. A low sound started in Ranger's throat, not the soft whine of grief Cole had heard when they buried another officer last year, but something tighter, edged. "Easy," Cole murmured, more reflex than thought. The workers began to crank the mechanism. The coffin lifted a few centimeters, wood groaning. Snow gusted around them in a sudden white curtain. The priest started the last line of the prayer. Ranger snapped into motion. He surged forward in a controlled lunge that still yanked Cole off balance. The leather slipped in cold fingers. The leash went slack for half a heartbeat. It was all Ranger needed. He hit the coffin with his front paws, claws scraping the polished wood, and let out a sharp bark that cut across the priest's words. Pause. Another bark. Then a rising howl that made the hairs on Cole's neck stand up straight. Bark, pause, bark. The alert pattern. The pattern they had drilled into him for hidden explosives, for narcotics, for the specific scent of a known person in the wrong place. "Ranger, heel!" Cole barked, but the command slid off the dog like water. Ranger dug at the lid, nails scratching dull lines into the shine, eyes wide and intense. He barked again in that same coded rhythm, not wild but focused, as if he were standing in front of a suspect's car instead of a coffin with a flag. Shock rippled through the line of mourners. The funeral director made a strangled sound. One of the pallbearers swore, stepping back. The priest hugged his book to his chest. You did not let a dog jump on a coffin. You did not interrupt a burial. Not here, not in a town like Ash Ridge. But Ranger was not any dog. He wore his own badge on his harness. People here had seen him find lost kids in whiteouts and corner dangerous men in dark alleys. And Cole had never known him to false alert. The instinct to yank Ranger back and apologize for the scene warred with a deeper reflex honed over years on duty. If your K9 screamed that something was wrong, you listened. Grace stepped closer, bouquet trembling in her grip. "Cole," she said quietly, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "That's his alert. For danger. For—" She glanced at the coffin and didn't finish. The cemetery crew had frozen, hands still on the straps, caught between training and superstition. The honor guard looked toward Cole. The priest looked toward the nearest senior officer. For a moment, no one moved. Cole made the decision for them. "Hold the lowering," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "Set it back." The workers obeyed almost before they seemed to realize they were moving. The coffin settled again onto its braces. Ranger stopped clawing, but stayed braced against the wood, panting, eyes never leaving the lid. The priest turned, frowning. "Deputy," he began, "perhaps the dog is only—" "He's not only anything," Cole cut in, more sharply than he meant. He took a breath, softened his tone. "We have an active K9 alert. We don't ignore those on the highway. We're not ignoring it over a grave." An older sergeant, mustache wet with snow, met his gaze and gave a small, tired nod. "Do what you need to do, Whitaker," he said. "If the chief yells, he can yell at me too." The funeral director balked when Cole told him they had to open the coffin. His gloved fingers fumbled at the latches. "Deputy, the family—" "Evan's family deserves to know if something's wrong," Cole said. The way his voice caught on Evan's name ended the argument. Grace's bouquet slipped in her grip. A single rose tumbled into the snow, its red startling against the white. The lid lifted on creaking hinges, the sound oddly loud in the hush that fell. Breath smoked in front of faces. Someone sobbed once, sharply, then caught themselves. Cole stepped to the edge and looked down. The man in the coffin wore Evan's uniform. The badge gleamed. The nameplate read, Heart. The flag was draped just so, but the face under the makeup was wrong. Older by a decade, jaw heavier, nose broken long ago, and never set straight. The build was wrong too, thicker through the shoulders, the hands folded on the chest broader and more scarred than Evan's narrow, quick fingers. A sharp chemical smell rose from the skin and suit, the tang of preservation fluids layered over something flat and unfamiliar. It hit Cole like a physical blow. It was not Evan. Around him murmurs rose, turned into small cries. Someone whispered Evan's name, as if the sound alone might rearrange the features back into the right ones. Grace's bouquet slipped completely from her hands. Roses scattered across the snow at her boots. Ranger dropped back to all fours and stood at Cole's side, gaze flicking from the stranger in the uniform to his handler's face. The frantic edge was gone. In its place was something calm and sober, as if, in his own way, the dog were saying, "This is what I tried to tell you." Cole's fingers dug into the edge of the coffin until his knuckles hurt. The careful script of the morning, prayers, flag, final words, lay in pieces at his feet. Whatever they had come here to do, it was not to lay Evan Hart to rest. Snow swirled harder, clinging to black coats and uniforms, turning everyone there into ghostly shapes. Ash Ridge stood on the edge of something it did not understand yet, caught between grief and the cold, bewildered shock of being lied to. Cole felt the weight of that lie settle on his shoulders, heavier than any winter snow. This was no simple tragedy on a frozen road. Someone had gone to great trouble to put the wrong man in this box. Someone had tried to bury more than a body. He looked down once more at the stranger in Evan's clothes, then at Ranger's unwavering amber eyes, and knew with a grim, quiet certainty that this was only the first thin layer of snow brushed aside from a much deeper grave. Whatever truth lay under it was not going to stay buried. Snow swept low across the hospital parking lot, carried by a wind that smelled of metal and storm. Ash Ridge Hospital was a compact, brick-built structure perched against the foothills, its windows glowing pale in the gray morning. Inside, the air was warm but tense, holding the metallic hush that always followed emergencies and unfinished truths. Deputy Cole Whitaker strode through the main hallway with Ranger close beside him, the dog's nails clicking softly on the tile. The events at the cemetery had cracked something open inside him. Shock had numbed him for minutes, maybe hours, but as he walked now, numbness gave way to a cold clarity, the same clarity he felt before breaching a door on a dangerous call. In the morgue waiting room stood Dr. Miles Camden, the county's forensic pathologist. Early 40s, Miles had a stooped posture from too many nights bent over microscopes and metal tables. His hair, dark once, now threaded with silver, was clipped unevenly, a habit from cutting it himself between cases. Thick glasses perched on a nose a shade too long for his narrow face. Despite the tiredness in his pale hazel eyes, his mind was sharp, methodical, allergic to guesswork. Years of examining the dead had given him a kind of quiet patience, but it had also carved a certain loneliness into his movements, as though he had learned to hold people at one careful step away. Miles adjusted his gloves when he saw Cole. "You brought him," he said, nodding at Ranger with cautious respect. "Good. I figured we'd need all the help we could get." Behind Cole, Grace Ellison emerged from the hall carrying a tablet pressed to her chest. Grace had changed out of her funeral coat and now wore pale blue scrubs under a fleece-lined jacket. Strands of auburn hair slipped from her braid, curling where the hospital's humidity touched them. Her skin still held the faint redness that came from crying in the cold, but her voice was steady when she said, "I've locked down the intake records. No one touches them until this is sorted." Cole nodded, appreciating the firmness in her tone. Grace rarely raised her voice, but when she decided on something, she became immovable in the quietest way. Miles motioned them inside. "Let's take a look." The morgue lights buzzed faintly as they entered, a long, squared room with steel tables, overhead lamps, and cabinets that clicked softly as temperature regulators cycled. The false Evan Hart lay on the central table, still dressed in the appropriated uniform, except where Miles had unbuttoned the collar for examination. Ranger halted at the threshold, his body shifting into the rigid alert posture Cole had learned not to ignore, ears forward, tail low, chest expanding slow and deliberate. Not fear, recognition of something wrong. The dog stayed silent, but the tension in him was unmistakable, like a bowstring drawn too tight. Miles cleared his throat. "We'll start with the basics," he said, lifting his clipboard. "This man is not Evan Hart, that much is obvious. Approximate age, mid-40s, height, 5'10". Scarring on the knuckles suggests extensive manual labor. He pulled a magnifier over the neck. There are puncture marks consistent with injection. But here's the part that concerns me. He gestured at the skin. Preservation chemicals, formalin derivatives. But the specific compound isn't standard. It's taken from a specialized batch the police department stores in their evidence freezer for controlled samples. Cole stiffened. Someone from inside the department? Someone with access, Miles replied. Or someone who knew where to get it. Grace leaned forward, brow furrowing. Miles, who brought this body into the hospital? Who signed off? Miles tapped the folder next to him. That's where it gets interesting. The transfer form lists a Dr. Monroe, but he held up a finger. We don't have a Dr. Monroe. Not in this hospital, not in the entire county's medical network. Grace pulled the tablet from her jacket and swiped through screens. I checked our credentialing system. No Monroe, no alias close to it. Whoever moved the body used a fake medical ID, and the intake clerk didn't question it because the badge scanned, likely a cloned RFID. Cole absorbed it all silently. The puzzle pieces slid into place with disturbing ease. A controlled chemical from evidence storage, a false doctor with a cloned ID, a planted body dressed as Evan. Someone had worked fast, clean, and confident. Someone who expected everyone else to fall in line. Ranger stepped forward, sniffing the edge of the table. Then he gave a short bark. Pause. Bark. The same coded pattern from the grave. Cole's pulse jumped. Miles watched the dog anxiously. That's the alert code, isn't it? Yes, Cole said. It's specific. He's signaling association with a known individual. Not direct scent match. More like contamination, transfer scent from someone he recognizes. Grace stared at Ranger. From who? Cole hesitated. Only one answer fit too well. Someone who's handled the body. Someone Ranger knows. The room felt colder. Miles exhaled slowly. Well, that narrows it down. But before we jump to conclusions, there's more. He pointed with a gloved hand. Lividity pattern suggests the man died before the supposed accident, possibly a day before. I found chemical residues under his nails, too. Industrial solvents used in makeshift drug labs. This aligns with activity we've seen from the opioid manufacturers in the mountains. I believe this man was connected to the Ash Ridge Syndicate. Grace's eyes widened. The same group Evan was tracking? Cole's jaw tightened. Evan had suspected the syndicate was reaching further into local institutions than anyone wanted to admit. He had hinted at a name once, someone in the department who stalled every search warrant Evan filed. A name that had felt like a shadow across the badge. Captain Mason Rourke, the interim captain. The man who had taken command after Chief Holbrook's retirement. A man with a reputation for decisiveness and charm, but whose smile never reached his eyes. Broad-shouldered, sharp-cheeked, with a perfectly symmetrical haircut, and a voice that could turn gentle or ice-cold depending on who listened. He had earned commendations years ago, but those who worked near him knew. Rourke ran his unit like a chessboard, and he hated when pieces moved without his permission. Cole remembered Ranger growling once, just a low rumble, when Rourke stepped too close during a briefing. At the time, Cole chalked it up to tension in the room. Now, he wasn't so sure. Cole? Grace's voice broke through his thoughts. Her brows were drawn, eyes searching his face. Where did you just go? Back to the day Evan came asking about a USB, Cole said quietly. Back to what he didn't tell me. Miles folded his gloves. USB? Yes, Evan had evidence, digital. He didn't trust uploading it. He said someone inside the department was intercepting data transfers. He wouldn't say who. Miles ran a hand through his hair. If this is connected to the syndicate, and if someone inside law enforcement helped them, then Evan's death was staged to silence him. And they expected no one to question it. Grace added. Cole exhaled slowly. He looked to Ranger, who met his gaze with steady amber eyes. An unspoken message. I recognize something here. Pay attention. So, Miles said, question is, what do you want to do next? Cole didn't answer immediately. He thought of the coffin lowering into the ground, of the stranger's face wearing Evan's uniform, of the cold precision behind it all. He thought of the way Ranger had trembled before alerting. He thought of the name whispering at the back of his mind. Finally he said, low and firm, we don't tell anyone what we found. Not yet. Miles nodded with grim understanding. You think it's someone in the department? I know it is, Cole said. Evan tried to warn me. Ranger confirmed the connection. Grace stepped closer. Cole, if Rourke is involved, I'm not accusing anyone yet, Cole cut in, but I'm not giving him the chance to cover this up. Ranger paced once around the table, then barked again in his 3-beat pattern, as if punctuating Cole's resolve. Grace put a hand on Cole's arm. Be careful, she whispered. You're up against someone who already buried one body to hide the truth. Cole gave a tight nod. Then we dig faster. A gust of wind rattled the windows, snow sweeping sideways against the glass like a warning tapping at the edges of their world. Outside, Ash Ridge looked peaceful under the storm, but inside the morgue a different chill settled, a knowledge that they were standing at the edge of a deeper conspiracy. Cole looked once more at the dead man in Evan's uniform, at the falsified badge, at the evidence someone thought would keep them quiet. Then he straightened. Grace, lock down everything you can. Miles, keep this room sealed and your findings off the system for now. Ranger and I need to revisit the explosion site. Grace blinked. Tonight? In this weather? Yes, Cole said. Whatever really happened to Evan started there, and we're already running behind. Ranger pressed his side to Cole's leg. Steady, ready, certain. The storm outside deepened, the sky darkening like the lid of a coffin slowly closing. But Cole felt something new inside him now, sharper than fear and steadier than anger. Purpose. The truth was out there under the snow, waiting, and it would not stay buried. Night came early to the mountains. By the time Deputy Cole Whitaker and Ranger left the hospital, the last traces of daylight had dissolved into a deep blue that clung to the treetops like bruised velvet. Snow continued drifting down in thick, slow flakes, soft at first, then harsher as winds picked up from the northern ridge. The world beyond the windshield blurred into a shifting curtain of white. Cole drove the patrol Tahoe up Highway 9 with caution, the tires groaning through slush. The heater hummed, blowing warm air across the cab, but the cold still crept in along the edges, the kind that didn't just settle on skin, but seeped into bone. Beside him, Ranger sat in the passenger crate, upright and alert. His ears flicked constantly, tracking sounds beyond human hearing. His breath fogged faintly on the steel grate. Even in the dim light, Cole could see the determined set to the dog's posture. Ranger remembered the explosion site. Ranger had never believed Evan was gone. Hang in there, buddy, Cole murmured, tightening his grip on the wheel. We're close now. The road narrowed as it climbed, winding between steep rock faces and thick forest. The spot where Evan's SUV had blown was miles ahead, on a remote, icy curve called Ridge 27, a place locals avoided in winter. A few more minutes, and Cole's headlights washed over the familiar bend carved into the mountainside. He stopped the engine, and silence rushed in, cold, heavy, absolute. Ranger whined once, sharp and eager. All right, Cole said, opening the back. Do your thing. Ranger leapt into the snow, landing lightly despite his size. He lowered his nose immediately, nostrils flaring, weaving through the shadows of pine trunks. Cole followed, flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the dark. The explosion site was a blackened scar on the slope, a crater of melted ice and scorched earth surrounded by shattered pine branches. Police tape flapped weakly between two trees, half buried by drifting snow. Cole's pulse tightened as he stepped forward. This was where he'd found Evan's badge crushed in the snow. This was where they told him the fire was too fierce for anyone to survive. The official narrative rolled through his mind, now fragile and thin as tissue paper. Ranger circled the perimeter, tail stiff, paws moving with the precision of a soldier on patrol. He sniffed charred debris, moved to the broken edge of the guardrail, then darted suddenly toward a cluster of blackened rocks half hidden beneath snow. "What is it?" Cole asked, hurrying over. Ranger pawed at something sticking from the melted ice, a thin, metallic tube, burnt but intact enough to identify. Cole crouched and lifted it with gloved fingers. A syringe barrel. "Damn!" he whispered. It wasn't just any syringe. It was a specialized model used by clandestine chem labs, the same type Dr. Camden had linked to the syndicate. Finding it here made the scenario painfully clear. The explosion had been staged. Evan hadn't crashed. He'd been ambushed. Cole bagged the syringe. Ranger, meanwhile, had picked up another faint scent. His ears twitched. He led Cole toward the tree line, moving slowly, nose close to the ground. Cole followed, crunching through knee-deep snow. Each breath stung his lungs. Ranger halted at the edge of a narrow footpath winding between the pines. It was barely visible under the snow, but the dog pressed forward with certainty, tail raised. "You want to go in there?" Cole asked, staring at the dark trail. "All right, lead." The two of them moved deeper into the forest. Snow muffled every sound except Ranger's breathing and the distant howl of wind funneling between cliffs. The path curved, dipped, and then leveled out near an old wooden sign, half swallowed by a snowdrift. Forest Service Cabin, 0.7 miles. Cole hadn't seen the cabin in years. It had been locked up after a lightning strike weakened its west wall. No one had patrolled it since. The thought that someone might be using it sent a cold ripple through his stomach. Ranger began to pull harder on the leash, urgency tightening his body. They arrived 5 minutes later. The cabin crouched beneath heavy snow weight, roof sagging slightly, windows dark. A padlock hung on the door, frozen solid. Ranger didn't go to the door. He trotted straight to the rear corner. Cole followed and saw the slanted boards tucked awkwardly against the side of the structure. Behind them was a gap, like someone had pried them open. Ranger squeezed through immediately. Cole hesitated only a moment before dropping to his knees and crawling in. On the other side, the world was colder. A hidden crawl space stretched under the floorboards, and directly beneath the cabin was a hatch leading underground. The hinges were new. Someone had installed them recently. Cole lifted the hatch. Cold air spilled upward. Unnatural cold, dry, and sharp. A storage bunker. He climbed down the ladder, Ranger right behind him. The bunker was a narrow concrete room lit by a battery lantern. Medical supplies lay scattered across a makeshift table. Blankets covered a figure on a cot. A faint IV bag hung from a bent metal rod. Cole's breath caught. Evan Hart lay there, alive, gaunt, pale, bruised at the temple. His sandy hair matted with sweat. His lips cracked from dehydration, his breath thin but steady. His wrists were loosely restrained with hospital gauze, as if someone wanted to keep him still but not injure him further. "Evan," Cole whispered, his voice breaking. Ranger bolted forward, pressing his head against Evan's arm, whining with a sound Cole had never heard from him before. Relief and pleading mixed into one. Evan stirred, his eyelids fluttered. His eyes, those familiar green eyes, opened just a slit. "Cole?" His voice was barely a breath. "Yeah, it's me. You're safe. It got you." Evan swallowed painfully. "Not accident." "I know." Evan's fingers curled weakly around Cole's sleeve. "Rourke." Cole leaned closer, heart pounding. "What about him?" "Tried to stop me. Wanted the USB." Evan coughed, grimacing. "Don't trust anyone." "I won't," Cole promised. "Not one damn soul." Evan's head fell back, consciousness slipping again. Ranger stayed pressed against the cot, placing a paw over Evan's arm, as though trying to anchor him to the world. Cole took a steadying breath and looked around the bunker. Someone had kept Evan alive. IV fluids, clean bandages, a heated blanket pad running off a portable battery. Whoever hid him here didn't want him dead. Just quiet. That thought chilled Cole even more. He gathered his composure. "All right," he murmured, "we're getting you out." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. If Rourke was involved, and if he'd already tried to kill Evan once, calling this in would be suicide. They had only one advantage. Rourke didn't know Evan had been found alive. Ranger looked up at Cole and gave a soft bark. The decision was made. Cole lifted Evan carefully, wrapping him in blankets, securing the IV line where it wouldn't pull. Ranger trotted beside him, vigilant as ever. As they stepped outside the cabin, the wind screamed across the ridge. The storm was worsening, and somewhere out there, someone had already realized their plans were unraveling. Someone who wouldn't let the truth come out without a fight. The storm thickened as Cole dragged the emergency sled from beneath the ranger cabin's collapsed shelving. Snow rattled against the warped wooden walls, a relentless hiss like sand thrown by an unseen hand. The temperature had dropped sharply in the last hour. Cold clung to the air so fiercely that Cole's breath smoked out in long, ragged clouds as he worked. He checked the straps of the sled 3 times, tightening each buckle until they refused to budge. Evan was wrapped in every blanket Cole could find. 2 wool layers, the thermal pad from the bunker, and a torn jacket that smelled faintly of antifreeze and old pine. His skin was still pallid, but the shallow rise and fall of his chest steadied Cole's nerves by degrees. Alive. Evan was alive, and that anchored Cole more firmly than anything else. Ranger stood guard near the cabin entrance, his silhouette framed by the crack in the door. His ears flicked back and forth, muscles taut beneath that heavy sable coat. He knew danger. He could smell it before Cole ever heard it. "Just a little longer, buddy," Cole murmured as he slid the sled closer. "We're getting him out of here." He lifted Evan carefully, mindful of the IV line taped to the man's forearm. Evan let out a faint groan, pain or confusion, Cole wasn't sure. He gently positioned him onto the sled, tucking the blankets tight around his shoulders. "You're doing good, Ev. Stay with me." Evan's eyelids fluttered but didn't fully open. Ranger sniffed Evan's face and gave a small lick to his cheek before backing up, as if making a silent promise to guard him with everything he had. When they stepped out of the cabin, the world had become something different. Wilder, louder, more unpredictable. Wind roared down from the ridge, tearing through the pines with a violent, rhythmic howl. Snow blew sideways in glittering sheets that stung Cole's exposed skin. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but Ranger had no such trouble. The dog pushed forward, tail low, body braced, following the faint scents and memories of the route they had taken in. Cole strapped himself to the sled harness and leaned his weight against it, dragging Evan behind him. Ranger trotted a few feet ahead, checking the path, circling back, guiding them toward the narrow forest trail that would eventually lead back to the Tahoe, if the storm hadn't buried it already. As they moved, Cole talked, not just for Evan, but for himself. "You know," he said into the wind, "the chief used to joke that you'd live forever because you were too stubborn to die." He grunted as he hauled the sled over a patch of hardened ice. "Don't you dare make a liar out of him." Evan made no reply, though his breaths grew steadier, no longer rattling at the edges. Ranger barked once, sharply, before trotting ahead again. Cole followed the signal. The dog rarely barked unless he meant something specific. Clear enough. Safe for now. Stay close. They emerged onto a wider trail. The storm eased slightly under the canopy of old spruce trees. Cole's flashlight stabbed through the dark, illuminating familiar trunks and rocks. He allowed himself a single breath of relief, until headlights flared somewhere behind him. They sliced through the snowfall, 2 white beams cutting sharp angles through the dark. Cole froze. Ranger growled low. A 4-4 engine rumbled, muffled by the storm but unmistakable. As it drew closer, the beams flicked across the trees, as if searching. "Damn it," Cole whispered. "He found us." Captain Mason Rourke. The vehicle crawled along the ridge road behind them. Even through the storm's roar, Cole recognized the metallic hum of the department's modified off-road unit, fitted with reinforced tires, engine heaters, and high-intensity fog lights. Rourke had authorized its purchase 3 months ago. Now Cole understood why. He tugged the sled off the trail and into the thicker trees. Ranger stayed glued to his side, hackles raised, eyes glowing amber in the dark. Rourke's voice carried faintly across the wind. "Whitaker, you out here?" Cole didn't answer. "Come on, Cole," Rourke called again, tone smooth, coaxing. "You took something from the station you shouldn't have. We need to talk." Cole clenched his jaw. Rourke always sounded calm even when he threatened people. It was one of the things that made him dangerous. Ranger let out a soft, suppressed whine, fear or fury, it was hard to tell. Cole lightly touched the dog's head. "I know, buddy." Rourke's light swept the side of the path. Snow glittered everywhere. Cole crouched low, positioning himself between the sled and the trees. He could not outrun a 4/4. The storm crippled visibility, but Rourke had specialized headlights. If he got too close, Cole hissed under his breath. "We need another path." Ranger seemed to understand immediately. He nudged Cole's knee, then trotted toward a darker gap between the trees. One Cole recognized with a jolt. The old mining route, abandoned for 20 years, closed off after a collapse, treacherous even on good days. But right now, it was the only place Rourke would hesitate to follow him, unless he was desperate. And he was desperate. Cole dragged the sled toward the hidden entrance while Ranger guided him around fallen branches and snow-choked roots. The wind died for a moment, enough for Cole to hear the crunch of tires turning off the road. Rourke wasn't waiting. He was hunting. Cole nearly stumbled as he reached the narrow opening between boulders. "Move, Ranger! Go!" Ranger ducked inside. Cole tugged the sled after him, scraping the metal against rocks. Just as he slipped into the darkness, light flared behind him, Rourke's headlights cutting across the forest trail. Cole pressed himself against the stone wall. The lights glided past, then slowed, then stopped. Rourke had seen the tracks. "Whitaker!" Rourke shouted, louder now, sharper. "If you come out with your hands up, we can fix this. You don't want to make mistakes you can't walk back from." Cole kept silent. He knew the tactic. Make the hunted believe escape was hopeless. Ranger bared his teeth. Rourke muttered something to himself, too far away to hear clearly. Then the engine roared again, and his vehicle drove deeper into the clearing. Cole exhaled shakily and pressed forward. The mining path narrowed into a steep descent. Cole planted each step carefully, feeling for secure ground under the snow. Hours passed, or minutes. Time blurred into the storm. Whenever Cole faltered, Ranger returned to his side, nudging his leg, leading him onward. The dog was tireless. His paw prints marked a perfect trail even through the thickest drifts. Eventually, the forest thinned. The wind screamed across the open ridge like a living thing. The air burned cold in Cole's lungs. He recognized the terrain, the upper stretch of Frost Summit. They were close to the one emergency shelter within walking distance. A tiny wooden rescue hut, built after a hiker froze to death 15 years earlier. No electricity, no heat, but walls. And walls might be enough. Ranger barked once, alert, directive. "I see it," Cole whispered. The hut's shadow loomed through the snow. He dragged Evan inside, kicking the door shut against the gale. The wooden walls rattled, thin and brittle, but they held. Cole set Evan on the bench and checked his pulse, weak but steady. Ranger circled the hut twice before settling near the door, ears sharply tilted forward, watching, listening. Outside, the storm masked all other sounds, but Cole knew Rourke would not stop until he got what he wanted, until he silenced Evan. Cole rested a hand on Ranger's back. "If he comes, we stand together." Ranger pressed his head into Cole's palm, a vow. Hours dragged by. Darkness thickened. Snow hammered the roof like fists. Then, far off, an engine growled. Rourke had found them. The long night was only beginning. The storm on Frost Summit did not howl. It roared, a monstrous unbroken voice rising from the ridgeline and tumbling through the canyons below. Snow tore sideways in silver sheets, scraping across the rescue hut like claws on tin. Cole kept one hand braced on the wooden bench to steady himself as another gust rattled the roof. Evan lay beneath the thick layers of blankets, face pale, breath thin but steady. Ranger sat planted at the door, muscles coiled, every sense locked outward into the storm. Cole checked Evan's bandages once more. "Just hold on," he whispered. "We're almost through this." But the night had other plans. Ranger stiffened, ears lifting sharply. A moment later, Cole heard it too. The low, guttural rumble of an engine pushing against the storm's resistance. The noise grew louder, bouncing between the rock faces like a threat spoken over and over. Rourke had found them. Cole moved to the narrow window, the only opening besides the door, and wiped away the frost with his sleeve. Headlights cut through the storm in wild arcs as Rourke's armored 4x4 ascended the ridge, the beams shimmering like two cold stars swallowed by snow. Cole's breath fogged the glass. Ranger growled low, but not aggressively, simply marking danger the same way a compass points north. His tail was straight, not tucked, the stance of an animal calculating every possible outcome. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured, though the words were more for himself. The 4x4 stopped about 30 yards from the hut. Its lights dimmed, then shut off completely. The sudden darkness outside was worse than the storm. It felt deliberate. A hunter putting away the lantern because he wanted the night to do his work. The engine cut. Silence slipped in. Not silence of peace, silence of intent. Then the door on the 4-4 opened, and a figure stepped out into the storm. Captain Mason Rourke moved with the confidence of someone who believed the world bent around his footsteps. Even in a blizzard, he walked with calm precision, shoulders squared beneath a black winter coat that billowed in the wind like the cloak of a victor surveying conquered ground. Snow streaked across his hair, rich brown with steel-gray strands that only made him look more severe. His jaw was sharp, his posture rigid, and his gloved right hand hovered near the holster at his hip. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He walked like he had all the time in the world. Cole stepped back from the window and checked the sled rope, ready to pull Evan behind whatever cover the hut offered. Ranger shifted beside him, tail sweeping low, gaze locked and unblinking. The lantern flickered as the hut creaked. A shadow darkened the door. Rourke's fist rapped once, calm, almost polite. "Whitaker," he called, voice muffled but unmistakably controlled. "This has gone far enough." Cole didn't move, didn't answer. "You know I'm going to come in," Rourke continued. "There's no road behind you and the storm's closing fast. You have no backup, no support. Evan isn't going to make it if we keep playing this game." Ranger snarled softly, but Cole placed a calming hand on the dog's back. "Think, Cole," Rourke said, tone dropping into a coaxing warmth he used on frightened suspects. "You're a good officer, a reasonable one. Let's talk this through. Let me help you." Cole finally spoke, voice steady. "You tried to kill him." Silence. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Then Rourke laughed, a quiet, humorless sound. "Kill him? If that were my goal, Whitaker, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Cole's jaw tightened. "You faked his death. You planted a body in his uniform. You poisoned him. You hid him in a bunker like he was contraband." "He was meddling," Rourke replied simply. "And he wasn't playing on the right team." Cole's pulse slammed against his ribs. "The syndicate?" Rourke's tone hardened. "You don't get to ask questions." He pushed the door. It didn't open. The lock held. So, he stepped back. Cole knew what was coming, a second before it happened. Ranger braced. Rourke rammed the door with his shoulder. The hut shuddered, wood groaning under the force. Cole held the frame from inside. Ranger lunged toward the sound, barking loudly now, the barks sharp and controlled, warning barks, not frenzied ones. Rourke backed up again. "Last chance, Whitaker," he called. "Open the door, hand over the man and the USB, and I promise you'll walk away from this frozen rock alive." Cole didn't answer. Rourke rammed the door again, with more force. The hinges cracked. Cole stepped back, pulling Ranger with him. Once more, Rourke slammed the door, and this time the top hinge snapped loose. The door hung crooked. Cole knew the next hit would break it entirely. When it came, it wasn't Rourke's shoulder, but the entire weight of his boot. The door flew inward with a violent crack, slamming against the wall. Snow and wind burst inside, swirling around them like a ghostly swarm. Ranger leapt forward, but not blindly. He aimed for Rourke's arm, intercepting the moment Rourke's gloved hand reached for his weapon. The timing was perfect. Ranger hit right as Rourke slipped on the threshold, his balance undermined by the storm whipping at his coat. With a bark like breaking ice, Ranger forced him sideways. Rourke staggered, boots sliding across the snow-covered floor. The gun skittered across the wooden planks and vanished under the bench. Cole surged forward, not to strike, but to block the path between Rourke and Evan. Rourke slammed into him, and the two men grappled. Boots scraping on the icy floor, breath steaming in the cold air. Cole felt the strength of a man who believed losing was impossible. Rourke shoved him, stumbling backward toward the open doorway. Ranger lunged again, not attacking, but positioning himself to cut off Rourke's options. The dog's instincts were sharper than the wind outside. Rourke looked between the dog, Cole, and the unconscious Evan, and for the first time, his controlled mask cracked. "You don't understand what's at stake," he snapped. That USB could bring down every politician in this valley, every ally you think you have. The syndicate isn't a gang, they're infrastructure, they're power. They're criminals, Cole said. Power, Rourke repeated, spitting the word like it was holy. And your friend chose the wrong side. Ranger growled again. Rourke lunged for the door, intending to get his weapon or escape or circle back. Cole couldn't tell. But the storm hit him full force. Snow gusted in, nearly knocking him off balance. A dark shape emerged through the white blur behind him. A vehicle, but not Rourke's. Tracked wheels. Heavy metal chassis built for mountain rescues. FBI. A floodlight cut through the storm, illuminating the shack and the three figures inside. Rourke froze. Agents shouted, "Hands where we can see them! Step away from the hut. Captain Rourke, do not reach for anything." Rourke's face shifted into something almost feral. "Grace!" he hissed. She called them. Cole felt a surge of relief hit like warmth. Grace, smart, steady Grace, had made it through the storm after all, making sure someone reached them before the worst happened. Rourke took a step back, hands half raised, but his eyes darted, calculating, always calculating. "Don't," Cole warned. Ranger barked once, a precise, commanding sound. Outside, agents advanced with practiced precision. Rourke's shoulders sagged. The fight left him. He let the storm swallow what was left of his pride as the agents cuffed him and pulled him toward the rescue vehicle. Lights faded into the snow as they carried him away. Inside the hut, quiet settled again. Cole sank to one knee beside Ranger, resting a hand on the dog's thick coat. "You did it, boy. You kept us alive." Ranger leaned into him, exhaustion finally softening the rigid lines of his body. Cole turned to Evan, checking his pulse again. Still steady. Outside, the storm began to break, snow thinning, wind easing, as if the mountain itself exhaled in relief. Frost Summit had held them through the worst. The dawn would take care of the rest. Spring did not arrive all at once in Ash Ridge. It crept in quietly, first in the softening of the snowbanks, then in the sound of running water trickling under sheets of ice, then in the way sunlight lingered a heartbeat longer on the rooftops each evening. By late April, the mountains still wore white crowns, but the lower slopes glimmered with the first shy greens of new pine needles. Cole Whitaker stood outside the community hall, hands in his pockets, breathing in the faint scent of thawed earth. The building buzzed with life, voices echoing through the open windows, laughter spilling into the yard, the excited chatter of children darting around in two large coats. A large banner flapped above the door. Ash Ridge Heroes. Commendation Ceremony. Cole tugged the collar of his dress uniform. He felt oddly out of place in it. The crisp lines and polished badge felt too formal for a town that had spent months grieving, healing, and rebuilding. But Grace had insisted he wear it, and no one in Ash Ridge argued with Grace Ellison when she used her "don't push me" voice. A soft whine came from near his knee. Ranger nudged him, tail sweeping the ground. The German Shepherd's winter coat was shedding in chunks, revealing a sleeker, sun-warmed layer beneath. A thin scar traced the bridge of his muzzle, barely visible now beneath the new fur. "You nervous too?" Cole asked. Ranger huffed, as if offended by the suggestion. "All right, fine. You're the brave one." Ranger sat taller, chest puffed, as if agreeing wholeheartedly. Cole couldn't help but smile. The ceremony hall was warm and loud and filled with the smell of fresh flowers and baked goods brought by nearly every grandmother in town. Grace waved them over from near the stage. She wore a simple spring dress under a light cardigan. Auburn hair coiled into a loose bun that let wisps frame her cheeks. A glow hovered around her, not just from the lights, but from the newborn sleeping against her shoulder in a soft gray blanket. Little Aria Whitaker, Cole's daughter. He still hadn't fully absorbed that reality. Grace smiled when she saw him, the soft, knowing kind of smile that had carried him through more storms than he could count. "You're late," she whispered when he leaned down to kiss her temple. "You can't rush perfection," Cole whispered back, straight-faced. Ranger barked once as if to say he's lying, earning a ripple of laughter from the people nearby. Grace rolled her eyes. "Honestly, sometimes I think Ranger is the responsible adult in this family." Cole opened his mouth to protest, but the baby stirred, tiny fingers curling around Grace's necklace, and his voice softened instead. "How's she doing?" "Warm, fed, peaceful." Grace brushed her nose against Arya's forehead. "Unlike her father, she is never late." Cole grinned sheepishly and scratched Ranger's ears. "You hear that? We've been insulted, both of us." Ranger leaned into the touch, undeniably pleased. On the stage, Evan Hart stood behind a podium, still thinner than the man Cole remembered but stronger every day. Physical therapy had rebuilt his strength, but there remained a gentleness to his presence now, a quiet reverence for breath and sunlight, and the chance to keep both. His sandy hair was trimmed, his uniform pressed. When he moved, a slight stiffness still tugged at his left side, but the determined fire in his green eyes was unmistakable. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone. The hall quieted instantly. "Thank you," Evan began, voice steady but soft. "I don't usually like being the center of attention. Cole can tell you that. He's the loud one." Laughter rippled through the audience. "But I think it's important to say this." Evan's eyes softened. "Ash Ridge has been through a dark season. Some of what we trusted wasn't what we thought. Some of the people who claimed to protect us were hiding things that nearly tore this place apart." No one spoke. Everyone remembered. "But the truth came out," Evan continued, "and that wasn't because of me. That was because of my team, because of the people who refused to give up on me. Grace, Miles, the FBI agents who listened, and most of all," he paused, looked straight at Cole. "Cole Whitaker and Ranger." A hush spread through the crowd before applause rose, loud, warm, echoing like thunder rolling through the mountains. Ranger's ears went back in pleased embarrassment. Cole felt something tighten in his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the night Evan was nearly lost forever. Relief. Evan stepped aside as a uniformed official from the governor's office approached the podium with two velvet-lined boxes. She read from a small card. "For extraordinary courage, resilience, and service to the people of this state, K9 Ranger is awarded the Medal of Valor." The applause intensified. Ranger tilted his head, confused but proud. Cole guided him forward. The official knelt, rare for someone of her rank, and fastened the small, shining medal to Ranger's collar. Cameras flashed. Ranger blinked at the sudden brightness, then looked up at Cole with wide, warm, amber eyes. Cole knelt beside him, forehead touching Ranger's for a moment. "You earned this," he whispered. "Every bit of it." Ranger licked his chin in response. After the ceremony, people swarmed the trio, congratulating, hugging, asking Ranger if he'd pose for pictures. Ranger endured the attention like a professional, though his tail wagged harder whenever a child reached out with sticky fingers or clumsy affection. Outside, sunlight melted the top layer of snow, turning it into glittering droplets sliding down the rooftops. Evan approached, hands in his pockets. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. Cole shook his head. "Not once." "You saved my life," Evan said, voice lowering. "Ranger saved your life," Cole corrected. "Ranger kept me alive. You brought me home." Evan exhaled, a shaky yet peaceful sound. "And I'm not wasting this second chance." Cole nodded. "None of us are." Grace joined them, Arya still sleeping. She placed a hand on Cole's arm, fingers warm. "Let's take a picture," she said softly. "A proper family one." Evan grinned. "I'll take it, but I'm in the next one." Cole wrapped his arm around Grace. Ranger sat perfectly between them, tail brushing Cole's boot. The mountains behind them shone with the first burn of spring light. Evan held up the phone. "Smile, or at least try," he teased. Cole tried. Ranger nailed it. The shutter clicked. Later, as the crowd thinned and the warmth of the day softened into late afternoon gold, Cole walked Ranger to the edge of the hall yard, where the forest met the road. He looked down at the shepherd sitting beside him, ears perked, eyes bright. "Winter's over," Cole said quietly. Ranger lifted his head, nose twitching toward the breeze, as if already scenting the green that would soon cover the mountains. Cole crouched, resting a hand on Ranger's back. "We made it, buddy." Ranger leaned into him, amber eyes shining with trust and triumph, and the softest rumble of contentment rose from the dog's chest. It felt like an answer, a promise, a new season, finally beginning. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with lightning or thunder. Sometimes they come quietly through a loyal dog who refuses to give up, through friends who stand beside us when the world feels cold, or through the strength God places in our hearts when we think we have none left. Cole, Evan, and Ranger remind us that even in the hardest winters, God never abandons us. He guides our steps, clears our path, and sends help in ways we do not expect. In our everyday lives, we face storms of our own sadness, fear, uncertainty moments when everything seems frozen. But faith teaches us that no night is too long and no mountain is too high for God's light to reach us. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what you believe in, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family always. And if you feel grateful for the quiet miracles He has given us, type Amen in the comments.